Does this deal with the logical problem of evil as you have the deductive argument that you gave, but then you now deal with the probabilistic argument of the magnitude, the duration, and the distribution of so much evil that you now have a probability kind of argument?
Well, you remember that as I stated the argument, it wasn't just that if there was a God, there wouldn't be any evil at all. It was that there wouldn't be the kind of evil that we see. So we've really jumped right into the middle with that argument. And I don't claim that this consideration about free will shows that the kind of evil that we actually observe in the world is consistent with God. It just shows that some is consistent with the and for all we know, if there was a God, there would be some evil in the world. But the next thing we have to do is simply to note that probably any successful story is going to have to incorporate this feature in some way. And even if that's wrong, even if there are other ways of doing it, some philosophers think there are, one family of stories that might have some chance of success will contain free will this way, but it can't just be, we can't just say this much and no more.
How do you differentiate between the global argument and the local argument as you phrased it?
The global argument is the argument that I just gave, that the world, look at the world as a whole, it contains vast amounts of really, really horrible evil. God wouldn't allow that, so there's no God. The local argument, and it's really, there are thousands of local arguments, one for each bad thing that you might point to. Obviously, you might point to the Atlantic slave trade and say God wouldn't allow that. The Holocaust, say God wouldn't allow that. The Lisbon earthquake, and say God wouldn't allow that.
Or a child dying of cancer,
one particular child. And one very famous argument in the philosophical literature simply involves a fawn dying in a forest fire where no human being could observe it and thus be affected by it in any way. That too is a local argument.
How do you deal with those?
I would first try to deal with the global arguments. And then, though I think the local arguments are sufficiently different from the global arguments that you can't just rest easy, even if you've solved the global, even if, I don't know if anybody could claim to solve this, but let's say, if you've shown that the global argument from evil is not a success, philosophically speaking, it could still be that some of these local arguments are, it might be that everybody was perfectly satisfied that this might be a true story about why God allows a vast amount of tremendous amount of evil in the world, but not why he allowed that thing to happen. After all, he could have removed that thing
without changing the global
picture.
Yeah,
there could still have been that vast amount. It could have had whatever purpose it has, but he could have removed that thing from the world.
So what do you do?
One way to talk about the vast amount of evil in the world is suppose that by human beings, by their free choices, have not simply harmed one another or something like that, like somebody punching somebody else in the nose or even stabbing someone or murdering someone, that they've also ruined themselves by separating themselves from God. That human beings were designed by God to be in union with God, that at one point in the past, our ancestors were in union with God. By separating themselves from God, they've turned themselves into really horrible people. And also maybe people that are unable to protect themselves from the forces of nature. As you know, people like to distinguish between moral evil and natural evil. But sometimes the distinction can get rather blurred. You know, that is, if you warn somebody, for example, not to go down that road because there's a volcanic eruption going on, and out of curiosity, the person does, disregarding your advice, makes a free choice to disregard your advice and go down there and then is killed by the volcano. Was that death, moral evil, or natural evil? It could be that, in fact, if human beings were originally able to protect themselves against natural evil by just say knowing when it was going to happen and avoiding it when they were in closer union with God, that all the evils that befall human beings in the world would have been avoided. I would think that God didn't have much choice about creating a world with, say, earthquakes. If he's not going to, if he wants the Earth to have a molten core, if he wants there to be a magnetic field that shields us from radiation in space, if he wants there to be plate tectonics so that the whole surface of the Earth isn't underwater, then yeah, there's going to be earthquakes. The solution would not be somehow to jury-rig a world by miracle so that there were no earthquakes, but enable people to avoid them. But suppose they turned away from God and were no longer able to avoid them. Suppose that when people turned away from God, they ruined themselves to an extent to which they were unable to turn back. You may notice that here I'm recapitulating in a very abstract sort of way the Judeo-Christian story of humanity's fall and separation from God. I want to suggest that maybe this is actually a feature of human history in some way, that we've separated ourselves from God, and that all the misery of the world is a result of this free act of separation. That each of us is now unable to turn back from God because this inability to turn back to God is somehow hereditary in our germplasm. Maybe it's inherent in genes that we inherited from pre-human ancestors, which didn't make any difference when we were united with God, but which do make a difference. The old selfish genes now are operating and now outside the kind of control that they had when human beings were united with God. This might be. I need to say a lot more than this. I'm only suggesting a road down which I might go. In the kind of time available to us, I don't think I can really tell a story that meets the problems of the global argument that sets out a satisfactory story. So what I'm doing is hinting at the way such a story would go. I think it can be developed.